Welcome back. Today we're jumping into the Gilded Age, roughly 1869 to 1896. You know, it's that era Mark Twain gave that sarcastic name, suggesting America looks shiny on the outside, like gold, but underneath, well, let's just say things weren't so solid.
That's a perfect way to put it. It was a time of just staggering physical growth. I mean, the population exploded, immigrants were pouring in, industry was booming.
Yeah, but the civic health, the government, it just couldn't keep up, could it?
Not even close. The sources we're looking at paint a picture of deep decay underneath that glitter.
It's such a stark contrast, isn't it?
Yeah.
Americans had just come through this incredibly bloody civil war, supposedly for a new birth of freedom. And what does they get?
Corruption, rampant inequality, political gridlock. It's pretty grim stuff.
So our mission today is to follow this trail, the political machinations, the money, the key moments where things went sideways.
Yeah.
We have to start with Ulysses S. Grant, a war hero who, well, the history suggests was maybe not cut out for politics.
An utterly inept politician is the phrase used. And this era, it really sets up so many conflicts later on, especially battles over money, currency, and crucially, the absolute failure to follow through on Reconstruction.
Right. So let's dive in. Grant's election in '68. How did that happen?
Well, after the whole mess with Andrew Johnson and Congress constantly fighting, people were just fed up with politicians. So Grant, the war hero, seemed like a good bet.
And the Republicans really played up that war heroing.
Oh, absolutely. They were waving the bloody shirt, as the saying went, basically reminding everyone of the war, the sacrifices, vote as you shot. It was powerful stuff.
Meanwhile, the Democrats, they were already fighting amongst themselves.
Yeah, and it was over money the defining issue, really. You had the wealthy folks in the East wanting war bonds paid back in gold, solid value.
Okay.
But then you had farmers and debtors, mostly in the Midwest, pushing something called the Ohio idea.
The Ohio idea.
Yeah.
What exactly was that? It sounds like a point of major conflict.
It really was. It was basically a call for inflation to help debtors. The idea was pay back those federal war bonds using the paper money, the greenbacks that had depreciated.
So more cash circulating, easier to pay off old debt.
Exactly. Keep interest rates lower. But if you were a creditor, someone who'd lent money expecting gold back, you hated this idea. You wanted hard currency.
And even with all that, Grant's win was really narrow in the popular vote.
Super narrow, only about 300,000 votes difference. And get this, his win probably depended on the votes of about 500,000 former slaves.
Wow. So that really underscored why Republicans felt they needed to, or at least should, keep a hand in Southern politics.
Precisely. Which leads us right into the mess that followed. The corruption. People called it the era of good stealings.
Okay, let's unpack that. The sources describe this whole post-war atmosphere as just stinking of corruption, like railroad promoters who'd build shoddy lines and vanish, leaving investors with nothing but 2 streaks of rust.
And it went right to the top, or at least near it. Take the Fisk and Gould plot in 1869. You had these 2 guys, Jubilee, Jim Fisk, and Jay Gould, try to corner the entire gold market.
How did they even attempt that?
They tried to manipulate Grant, actually through his brother-in-law, to convince him the Treasury wouldn't sell off gold. They wanted to drive the price sky high.
And did it work?
It blew up spectacularly on Black Friday, September 24th, 1869. The Treasury did release gold, the price plummeted, and tons of honest business people were ruined.
And Grant's involvement. The finding was he acted stupidly and indiscreetly. That seems mild.
It does, doesn't it? It suggests maybe a willingness to look the other way, or perhaps just extreme naivete. But this federal-level stuff went hand-in-hand with massive local graft.
Like Boss Tweed in New York.
The ultimate example, William Boss Tweed, bribery, fake elections, skimming contracts. He and his ring might have looted New York City of up to $200 million.
$200 million. In 1870s money, that's staggering. How did they finally nail him?
It was largely the New York Times exposing the fraud, plus these incredible cartoons by Thomas Nast. Tweed apparently hated them, saying his followers couldn't read the articles, but they can't help seeing them damn pictures.
Pictures cutting through the noise. But the federal level kept pace, right? Crédit Mobilier.
Right, the Crédit Mobilier scandal surfaced in 1872. Insiders at the Union Pacific Railroad basically set up their own construction company.
And hired themselves.
Exactly. At hugely inflated prices. They raked in dividends reported as high as 348%. And the really sneaky part, they gave shares of this company stock to key congressmen to keep them quiet.
So it wasn't technically illegal bribery, but, well.
It was corruption laundered through corporate structure, and there was more. The whiskey ring in 74-75 cheated the Treasury out of millions in excise taxes on liquor.
And Grant again.
He initially said, "Let no guilty man escape." But when his own private secretary got caught up in it, Grant stepped in and helped get him off the hook.
That must have just disgusted people.
It absolutely did. All this Grantism led directly to a revolt within the Republican Party itself. The Liberal Republicans formed in 1872.
Their slogan was great. Turn the rascals out.
Simple and direct. They nominated Horace Greeley, the editor of the New York Tribune. He was, well, a bit erratic. The Democrats even endorsed him, kind of foolishly.
Did it work? Did they kick Grant out?
Nope.
Yeah.
Grant won re-election easily, electoral college-wise. But even though the Liberal Republicans lost badly, their movement wasn't totally pointless.
Also.
It pressured the regular Republicans. They ended up passing a General Amnesty Act, removing restrictions on many former Confederates, reducing some of those high Civil War tariffs, and even starting some mild civil service reform. The pressure made a dent.
So some small reforms, but the underlying issues of corruption and shaky economics are still there.
Absolutely. And then, just as things seemed maybe slightly calmer, the bottom completely dropped out.
Right. The Panic of 1873. This wasn't just a little recession. This was a major crash. What set it off?
Basically, too much expansion, too fast, all built on credit. Railroads, mines, factories. Everyone was borrowing heavily, assuming the boom would last forever.
But it didn't.
No. Loans went unpaid, banks started failing, the whole credit system just collapsed. Over 15,000 businesses went bankrupt. It was brutal.
And the impact on ordinary people,
Yeah.
especially vulnerable groups.
Devastating. You know, the Freedmen's Savings and Trust Company, which held the savings of many African Americans, it failed because of risky loans. Depositors lost something like $7 million. Gone.
Just wiped out. And this crash, it must have thrown fuel on that fire we talked about earlier, the fight over money.
Oh, absolutely. It reignited the currency war. Debtors, mostly farmers, were desperate. They demanded more greenbacks, more paper money inflation, basically, to make debts cheaper to pay.
Well, the creditors, the banks, the wealthy.
They wanted the opposite, deflation, hard money, gold. They wanted the value of money to stay high or even increase.
So who won that fight?
In the short term, the hard money side. Congress passed the Resumption Act in 1875. That promised the government would start withdrawing greenbacks from circulation and make all paper money redeemable in gold by 1879.
Okay, gold standard it is. And they also did something with silver.
Yes, the so-called Crime of 73. Congress stopped the minting of silver dollars. This was seen by debtors and silver miners out west as another move to keep the money supply tight, another deflationary policy.
So the government's policy became contraction, reducing the money supply, hoarding gold. Good for government credit, maybe, but for people struggling in the Depression.
It made things worse. Less cash circulating just deepened the Depression for many. It directly led to political backlash, like the formation of the Greenback Labor Party in 1878, demanding cheap money.
This whole era just feels like one crisis after another, overlaid with this constant political stalemate. You mentioned earlier the parties weren't that different on major issues, but the loyalty was intense.
Fierce loyalty, often based more on things like ethnicity, religion, cultural background, and especially who got the government jobs patronage.
Which brings us to the internal Republican fight, stalwarts versus half-breeds.
Right. It sounds complicated, but it was mostly about who controlled the patronage machine. Roscoe Conkling led the stalwarts. They were all in on swapping jobs for votes, old school style.
And the half-breeds, led by James G. Blaine.
They talked a bit about reform, but mostly they just wanted their faction handing out the jobs instead of Conkling's guys. It was an internal power struggle.
And this infighting, plus the tide elections, leads us straight into the election of 1876, right? Hayes versus Tilden, a real nail-biter.
One of the most contested elections ever. Tilden, the Democrat, actually won the popular vote. But the electoral votes from 3 southern states, Louisiana, South Carolina, and Florida, were disputed. Both sides claimed victory there amidst widespread fraud and intimidation.
And the Constitution didn't say who should count those disputed votes.
Exactly. It was silent on that specific point. Congress was divided. The country was furious. People were literally talking about Tilden or blood. It felt like the nation might fracture again.
So how did they avoid another conflict? This sounds incredibly tense.
They struck a deal, the Compromise of 1877. It's infamous for a reason.
Okay, what was the deal?
Officially, Congress created an electoral commission, 15 members. It ended up having an 8-7 Republican majority.
Ah, I think I see where this is going.
Predictably, they voted 8-7 along party lines to give all the disputed electoral votes to the Republican, Rutherford B. Hayes, making him president.
But there had to be a catch. The Democrats wouldn't just roll over for that.
There was a huge catch, the compromise part. In return for Democrats allowing Hayes to take office peacefully, Hayes agreed to pull the last remaining federal troops out of Louisiana and South Carolina.
The last federal troops.
Yes, the ones propping up the Republican governments there. This was the signal. The Republican Party was effectively abandoning its commitment, whatever was left of it, to black civil rights and Reconstruction in the South.
So the price of avoiding another conflict over the election was the end of Reconstruction.
That was the devastating price. The remaining Republican state governments in the South collapsed almost immediately. White Democrats, the so-called Redeemers, took complete control.
And what did that mean for African Americans?
It meant the systematic stripping away of rights gained after the Civil War, voter suppression through fraud, intimidation, poll taxes, literacy tests,
And
economic subjugation. Most black families, and many poor whites too, were forced into sharecropping or tenant farming. They were trapped by the crop lien system.
Explain the crop lien system. It sounds bad.
It was brutal. Basically, landowners or local merchants would lend supplies, seed, tools, food to farmers on credit, taking a lien or claim on their future crop harvest as collateral. But the interest rates were incredibly high, and crop prices were often low. So farmers almost never cleared enough to pay off the debt. They'd start the next year already owing money, trapped in a cycle they couldn't escape. Perpetual debt.
Tied to the land, but not owning it. And this economic control was paired with legal segregation.
Yes. What started as informal separation hardened into state laws across the South by the 1890s, the Jim Crow laws. Separate schools, separate transportation, separate everything.
And the Supreme Court weighed in.
Tragically, yes. In 1896, the Plessy v. Ferguson decision, the court ruled that separate but equal facilities for blacks and whites were constitutional under the 14th Amendment.
Separate but equal. But was it ever equal?
Never. The sources are crystal clear. Facilities for African Americans were grotesquely unequal. It cemented segregation as the law of the land for decades.
So Reconstruction ends, Jim Crow rises. And this era also sees the start of major class conflict, doesn't it? The Great Strike of 1877.
Yes. Right after the troops left the South, conflict erupted elsewhere. The 4 largest railroads cut worker wages by 10%. That sparked the first major nationwide strike.
How did that play out?
It got violent. Strikers clashed with militia. President Hayes, who had just taken office thanks to the compromise, didn't hesitate to use federal troops.
The same troops just pulled from protecting rights in the South were now used against striking workers.
Exactly. It showed the government siding firmly with capital against labor, and it exposed how weak organized labor really was at that point.
And these divisions weren't just class-based, right? There were ethnic clashes, too, particularly against the Chinese in California.
Very much so. Economic anxiety fueled resentment, especially among Irish immigrants competing for low-wage jobs. Demagogues like Dennis Kearney whipped up anti-Chinese feeling.
Leading to actual legislation.
Yes, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. Congress slammed the door, banning nearly all immigration from China. That ban stayed in place, incredibly, until 1943.
Wow. But there was a counterpoint later, a Supreme Court case.
A crucial one. U.S. v. Wong Kim Ark in 1898. The court affirmed the principle of birthright citizenship just solely based on the 14th Amendment. Anyone born in the U.S. is a citizen, regardless of parentage. A vital check against complete exclusion.
Okay, shifting back to presidential politics and that theme of patronage, Garfield's assassination in 1881 seems like a direct, tragic consequence of the spoils system.
It really was. President James Garfield was shot just months into his term by Charles Guiteau, a man described as mentally unstable, but crucially, also a disappointed office seeker.
He thought he deserved a government job for supporting Garfield.
Yes, and when he didn't get one, he shot the president. His reported cry, "I am a stalwart, Arthur is now president," just perfectly captures the madness of the patronage system. Garfield's vice president, Chester Arthur, was a notorious stalwart associated with Conkling.
The shock of that assassination must have been immense. Did it finally force real reform?
It did. It provided the momentum needed to pass the Pendleton Act in 1883. This is often called the Magna Carta of civil service reform.
What did it do?
It established the Civil Service Commission. It made appointments to many federal jobs dependent on competitive exams, not political connections or pull. It aimed to professionalize the federal workforce.
A huge step. But did it have any downsides or unintended consequences?
A major one, according to the analysis. If politicians couldn't rely on handing out government jobs to reward supporters and fund campaigns anymore, where would they get the money?
They had to look elsewhere.
Increasingly, they turned to wealthy individuals and, more importantly, to the bulging coffers of the big corporations.
So the Pendleton Act, while cleaning up patronage for jobs, might have actually deepened the connection between politics and big business money.
That's the argument. It shifted the source of political funding, creating a new kind of dependency, a really important legacy of this period.
And this changing landscape brings us to Grover Cleveland, the first Democrat elected president since before the Civil War, taking office in 1885. What was his approach?
Cleveland was a firm believer in laissez-faire minimal government intervention. He famously vetoed hundreds of private pension bills for Civil War veterans, many pushed by the powerful GAR lobby.
Wow.
The Grand Army of the Republic, the main Union veterans organization, very influential. Cleveland basically said the government should not support the people. He saw these pensions as handouts.
Okay, so limited government.
Okay.
But then he tackles a big economic issue, the tariff. Why?
Because those high Civil War tariffs were still in place, meant to protect American industry. But by the 1880s, they were generating a huge annual treasury surplus, like $145 million a year. It was becoming embarrassing.
A surplus was embarrassing.
To Cleveland, yes. He argued it was unnecessary taxation taken from consumers to benefit protected industries. Monopolies, he'd say. He wanted lower tariffs to reduce consumer prices and end the surplus.
So he made this a central issue.
He pushed it hard in 1887, making it the key issue for the 1888 election. He wanted to force a debate.
And how did that turn out for him?
He lost the election to Benjamin Harrison, the Republican, even though Cleveland won the popular vote. It was another one of those Gilded Age squeakers decided by the Electoral College.
And did money play a role, connecting back to that post-Pendleton idea?
Big time. The Republicans reportedly raised a massive campaign fund, around $3 million, largely from industrialists terrified of lower tariffs cutting into their profits. Business had definitely adapted.
So Harrison wins, Republicans are back in control. What happens next?
They unleash the billion-dollar Congress from 1889 to 1890, led by the powerful Speaker of the House, Thomas B. Reed, nicknamed Czar Reed for his iron grip.
$1 billion. First time Congress spent that much.
First time. They spent freely on pensions, public works, and crucially, they increased silver purchases to appease farmers and miners somewhat. But the big thing was the tariffs.
So they raised it even higher.
Oh, yeah. The McKinley Tariff Act of 1890 pushed rates up to an average of 48.4%, the highest yet in peacetime.
And the impact of that, especially on farmers.
It was punishing. Farmers had to buy manufactured goods protected by these high tariffs, making everything more expensive for them. But when they sold their crops wheat, cotton they were selling into unprotected global markets where prices were often low.
Squeezed from both ends.
Exactly. This growing anger and economic pain directly fueled the rise of new protest movements, especially the Farmers' Alliance, which became a powerful political force heading into the 1890s. It really signaled the end of this specific stalemate and the beginning of a new era of agrarian revolt.
So that takes us through the core of this Gilded Age political paralysis. We started with Grant and the era of goods dealings, saw the devastating Panic of '73, the currency wars, and that critical turning point, the Compromise of 1877.
Which effectively ended Reconstruction and paved the way for Jim Crow. Then the rise of class conflict, early attempts at reform like Pendleton, and the ongoing battle over tariffs that just hammered farmers.
It really was, as the sources say, a bitter dose of corruption, widening inequality, wide-open class conflict, and political stalemate. When you look back at this whole period, what are the biggest, most lasting takeaways for you?
I think there are two huge legacies that really echo down through the 20th century and beyond. First, the government's formal retreat from protecting racial equality in the South. Jim Crow and Plessy set the stage for decades of segregation and disenfranchisement. The impact was just immense and catastrophic.
Right. And the second?
The shift in political funding. The Pendleton Act, while well-intentioned perhaps, inadvertently pushed politicians towards big business for money. That cemented an alliance, a reliance that has profoundly shaped American politics ever since.
So racial inequality, legally entrenched, and big money deeply embedded in politics. Those are pretty heavy legacies.
They absolutely are. But, there's one final thought, maybe a sliver of something else buried in there. Even as this era saw rights stripped away and segregation legalized, the sources do remind us Those very constitutional amendments, the 14th and 15th, the ones being undermined, they didn't disappear.
They stayed on the books.
Exactly. They remained dormant in some ways, but legally present. And eventually, decades later, they became the very legal foundation used by the civil rights movement to challenge segregation and demand equality in court.
So a seed of future progress hidden within an era of regression. It's definitely something to think about. The long arc of history.
It is. It shows how even in dark times, the legal structures can sometimes hold potential for later change. An incredible complexity hidden behind that shiny, gilded surface.
Well, thank you for walking us through that complex and often troubling period. And thank you all for joining us for this deep dive into the political paralysis of the Gilded Age.